Hi, this is Eric from Longbox Review at longboxreview.com. And this is my June 2022 Spotlight episode where I'm going to spotlight some comic book news, some things from previews, and I believe a first on the show, a podcast spotlight for the Fantastic Comic Fan podcast. But first up, the news. So the first thing I have for you for the comic book news today is the Will Eisner Comic Industry Awards nominees for 2022, which are the awards show will be during, of course, the San Diego Comic-Con this year in July, so next month at the time of this recording. So just briefly, some things. DC Comics and Image Comics have the most nominations overall. DC has 15 and Image has 14. Nightwing had the most nominations for DC with 5 total, and 3 nominations for Destroy All Monsters, which is the Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker Reckless book, one of those books. So 3 nominations for that, for just that one graphic novel. So that's interesting. Across 32 nomination categories, over 150 titles and 65 publishers are represented in these awards. James Tynion IV has a total of 5 nominations, the most for any individual on this list, which is not surprising when you start looking at all of the nominations and seeing all the works that he is part of that's been put out in the last year. So I'm going to go through not the entire list of Eisner nominees, but I wanted to spotlight a few of these things and just, give you what I would choose if I were a person who could cast their vote for these things. So first up is Best Continuing Series. And of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there was Bitterroot, The Department of Truth, Immortal Hulk, Nightwing, and Something is Killing the Children. So I have read all but one of these. I have not read Bitterroot yet. So this is going to be sort of like my Oscar thing where, you hear the Oscar nominations for Best Picture and, a lot of people go out and watch all the Best Picture nominees. Well, I used to try to do that. Not so much anymore, but I think I'm going to start doing this for Best Continuing Series. It is somewhat self-gratifying that I have read and enjoyed 4 of these 5. And I can understand why they are on this list. So not counting Bitterroot because I've not read it. Of the 4 that I have read, I would have to choose Immortal Hulk by Joe Bennett, other artists, and Al Ewing as writer from Marvel, because that was probably like I said, all these are good. I'm absolutely loving Nightwing, of course. I've talked about that in a previous episode. And Something is Killing the Children is something that I am enjoying. But overall, given the scope and the just the general story, the characterizations, just the presentation of the book, I think Immortal Hulk really deserves that award. I'm looking forward to discovering Bitterroot on my own and determining how this fits in this list as well in the future. For Best Limited Series, Beta Ray Bill, The Good Asian, Hocus Pocus, The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, Stray Dogs, and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. Now, this is probably not fair because I've actually only read 2 of these. I've already talked about how the Many Deaths of Layla Starr really had an impact on me. This is by Felipe Andrade and Ram V from Boom Studios. And the only other one that I've read so far, and I'm only up to issue 5 or 6, I can't remember now which, I think it's 6, is Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow by Bilquis Evely and Tom King. Both are beautiful books. Both are telling interesting stories about these female characters. But given this, given my overall reaction and joy, utter joy at reading The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, I have to pick that one. Obviously, I need to go and check out some of these other ones. I have heard good things about the Beta Ray Bill limited series from Marvel. I've been seeing The Good Asian being promoted here and there by fans and others. I have Stray Dogs. I've not read. I have the collection. I've not read it. I've heard of Hocus Pocus, but I don't recall ever having read this, because this is it looks like it's a webcomic. So anyway, I'd be interested to hear your opinions on these books that I've not read. So please let me know. But I'll move on to the best new series, which the nominees include The Human Target, The Nice House on the Lake, Not All Robots, Radiant Black, and Ultra Mega. Now, of these 5, I have read 3. So I've not read Not All Robots from Mike Deodato and Mark Russell. This is published by AWA Upshot. And Ultra Mega by James Herron from Image Skybound. So I actually hadn't even heard of that one, I don't think. I have heard of Not All Robots. Anything that Mark Russell does, I tend to at least take a look at to see if I want to read it. And this is something that's on my radar, but I'm waiting for the trade, I think, on that one. But the other 3, Radiant Black from Image by Marcelo Costa and Kyle Higgins, I have been loving this. I've talked about this series before, at least the first volume, and how much I was looking forward to reading it and how much I enjoyed it. I just read volume 2 recently, and so I'll be talking about that in a future Pull List review episode, I believe, for later this month. Anyway, I continue to enjoy that. The Human Target by Greg Smallwood and Tom King has been just a delight, a visual delight, and just a wonderful exploration of these characters, different takes of these characters than, say, mainstream DC continuity. But it's just a joy to look at. I so rarely talk about how much, actually, I think I've been talking about it a lot recently, but how much a comic book makes me feel just based on the visuals alone. And this is one of them. However, I'm going to give this, of the 3 that I've read, I'm going to give the nod for Best New Series to The Nice House on the Lake by Alvaro Martinez Bueno and James Tynion IV from DC. This was a title that has been an absolute surprise. I have said in the past that I'm not the biggest James Tynion IV fan, although I seem to be reading quite a few of his books. The Nice House on the Lake being one of them. And, visually the covers were striking and it made me interested in the book, and the premise of the book made me interested in reading it. But it's like, I'll wait and read it on the DCU app, which is what I did. And I now am looking forward each and every month to reading the newest issue of this series. I cannot wait to see how this series turns out in the end. So I'm not even sure where they're at publication wise. Is it over? Is this series done, or at least the first arc? I don't even know if it's an ongoing. The way that the story itself seems to lend itself towards a limited series, and given that it's a Black Label series, that's what I assume. But anyway, I'm not even sure if this book is done. I'm just catching up as they are being released on the DCU Infinite app. So anyway, wonderful surprise, and I'm quite enjoying that series. Okay. Best Writer, there is the nominees are Ed Brubaker, Kelly Sue DeConnick, Felipe Melo, Ram V, and James Tynion IV. And so what they did here in the listings is, I assume, list the books for which they are nominated as Best Writer for this Eisner 2022 awards. And so if you go by just the number of books that Ram V and James Tynion IV. So James has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 books here. And Ram V has 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4. So, and then the rest have either 1 or 2. So I think it's, there's 2 things about this that I want to point out. That the fact that Ram V and James Tynion are putting out so many books in let's say a year time span. I don't know how accurate that is, but those are the books that they listed, right? So that's impressive that they are continuing to be recognized for their writing, given so many books. It's also amazing that, say, Felipe Melo and Kelly Sue DeConnick are recognized for just one book each. So that's Ballad for Sophie from Top Shelf. For Mello and for DeConnick, it is Wonder Woman Historia, the Amazons Book 1, which I just read recently, and I will gush about it in my next Pull List review. So the fact that they are listed as best writer, let's just assume that this is true just for those books. That's amazing too. So, and then Ed Brubaker, of course, for 2 of the Reckless books, Destroy All Monsters, which I think was already mentioned earlier, and Friend of the Devil. So, however, given the stuff I've read, which I have read, I've not read anything from Mello. I've read other works by these other writers, or I've read most of the works by these other writers, but I have to say, despite what I just said about Tynan's The House on the Lake and the fact that I'm reading his Something is Killing the Children and The Department of Truth, Romvey's The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, I've already talked about that, how had I read that last year, that would have been on my best of 2021 list. I'm going to give the nod to Ed Brubaker because this is kind of a cheat, I guess, because it's not. It is based on the books that are listed here, but Ed Brubaker continues to consistently be one of my favorite writers of all time. So I'll give it to Mr. Brubaker. So best penciler inker or best penciler inker team. So Felipe Andrade, Phil Jimenez, Bruno Redondo, Esad Ribic, or is it Ribich? P. Craig Russell. So I have seen, yes, I have either read directly or seen the art from all of these books, all of these artists. So I actually had, when I was putting this list together, originally I had Bruno Redondo chosen as my pick for this. But then, just a few days ago, at the time of this recording, I read Wonder Woman Historia, the Amazons, Book 1, the aforementioned item for Kelly Sue DeConnick as writer, and I had to change my choice to Phil Jimenez, because that is, as I said on Twitter, the most beautiful book I've ever read, the most beautiful comic book I have ever read. And I can't wait to own the print version of this because I was waiting stupidly. Now I realize stupidly waiting for the trade collection of Wonder Woman Historia. I am now going to go try and find the book 1 somewhere because it's gorgeous. And I'm sure I will talk at length or at least more in, like I said, in the next Pull List review. So there you go. Best cover artist. So this is something that has been more and more in my mind as I order my books month to month. And I have some favorites, and some of those are on here. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6 of these for some reason instead of 5. But anyway, Jen Bartel, David Mack, Bruno Redondo, Alex Ross, Julian Totino Tedesco, and Yoshi Yoshitani. I am familiar with most of these, except for I'd have to go look it up because for Yoshi Yoshitani. But the rest of these I've seen or I have purchased the books which they have mentioned here for each one. David Mack is a phenomenal artist. Bruno Redondo has fast become one of my favorite comic book artists, just based on the Nightwing and the Suicide Squad book that he did with Tom Taylor. Alex Ross continues to be a perennial favorite of mine, but I have to say, there's something about Jen Bartel's work that I am in love with, and I think it's mostly the coloring of the covers that she does. So they list here Future State Immortal Wonder Woman 1 and 2, Wonder Woman Black and Gold #1, Wonder Woman 80th Anniversary, which I believe I bought her version of that special, and then Women's History Month variant covers from Marvel. Basically, when I do my monthly comic book order, I do a search for a few cover artists to see if they have anything that I did not notice when I looked through the previous catalogs. And if it is something that I am liking, I will buy that issue. Not necessarily because I want to read that comic book issue, but because I want that cover art. And I've been doing that a lot more in the last, I'll say 3, 4, maybe 5 months. And Jen Bartel is top of that list whenever I go to look for what is it? I think I have like 6 or 7 artists that I search for every month. Anyway, her stuff is just so striking. So you can pick it out very easily on a comic book store shelf for sure. So I give it to her. Best coloring. And the list is composed of the following: Felipe Andrade Inés Amaro for The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, Terry Dodson for Adventure Man, Kay O'Neill for the T-Dragon Tapestry, Jacob Phillips, Destroy All Monsters, Friend of the Devil as well. And then finally, Matt Wilson, Undiscovered Country, Firepower, Eternals, Thor, Wolverine, Jonah, and the Impossible Monsters. So Matt Wilson is one of my very favorites as well. You know, he does a lot of work, obviously. So it's a testament to his ability to produce so much work and yet be so good at his job and so recognizable. Nothing against any of these other nominees. Actually, I will say I've only read the books that Jacob Phillips and Terry Dodson have colored. Oh, no, I'm sorry. And Felipe and Inés for The Many Deaths of Layla Starr. So most of these I've read. But of course, I'm going to choose. And I think unless somebody else comes along that just knocks my socks off, I'm probably always going to choose Matt Wilson as my best colorist. All right. And then, okay, finally, I'm done. I'm done with this. This is, I just want to note this. And there's actually 2 things like this on this list, or not on the Eisner's list, but in my June Spotlight list. Anyway, one of the best digital comics that was nominated for an Eisner is Everyone is Tulip by Nicole Gu and Dave Baker. And if you have listened to my previous Spotlight episodes, I have featured Everyone is Tulip, which came out about a year ago. Well, I think it was a Kickstarter. Now I'm forgetting my own notes from a previous episode, but that was something that I caught my attention. In fact, I think it was the last Spotlight episode. Anyway, doesn't matter. Go listen to that. You can find it in the feed if you've not listened to it. Regardless, I just wanted to note that this is nominated for an Eisner, and I quite enjoyed what I read. So it deserves the nomination for sure. All right, I'm going to move on to other news now. This might be a long episode. Okay, so there is a Batman versus Robin miniseries coming out from DC Comics. But it's not that particular miniseries that interests me, that I thought was newsworthy. It was this quote from Mark Waid, who is the writer on this. So he said in an interview regarding this miniseries, the first arc of Batman Superman World's Finest was, and always has been, designed deliberately to lead into what is going to be Batman versus Robin. He continues, World's Finest's second story arc will cross over with another new but as yet unnamed limited series. So that's what got me interested in this, is not the miniseries themselves, but the fact that they're designing this ongoing series, which, granted, it features Batman, which obviously would sell. It has Superman. More importantly, it has Dick Grayson Robin for me. But as I've talked about in a previous, again, pull list review about Batman Superman World's Finest, I love that comic. Apparently, a lot of other people do too. And so, just did they have a feeling that this would connect so strongly and positively with fans that they decided to do what Waid is talking about? How it's always has been designed deliberately to lead into this miniseries, or is that something that came up as they were producing it, and maybe the first issue came out? I don't know. How quickly can they put these things together? I'm not sure. But just the idea of this new series being a lead into other miniseries, I think that's a great synergy for superhero comic books. it's not something new, obviously, but I think it's rare for a new book to be able to do it, or for them to do it in this way, I guess. And, I'm sure you could come up with a bunch of examples. I couldn't really think of anything like that in recent memory, or even long-term memory, that wasn't like an event book. So, which this is not. It's not even in current continuity. So I'm just impressed with this idea, with this approach, with this strategy. So good for them. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. But as long as they continue to create wonderful stories with featuring those characters in whatever continuity this is, I'm loving it. So keep going. All right. Next up is everybody's heard about this, but I wanted to make note of it. So Joe Quesada has left Marvel Comics. So in 1998, Quesada became editor-in-chief of the Marvel Knights line, and I would come back in a big way. I never left comic books in the 90s, but I only bought a few, and most of those were Vertigo titles, and there's a couple superhero titles as well. But I did not read. I don't think I read any Marvel comics around that time. So, but in the early 2000s, I had more money because I had a better job starting that time, and I was a fan of Brian Michael Bendis's. Was Powers already out at that time? I think so. Anyway, I started noticing. So he was working on Daredevil, and then the Jessica Jones series, Alias. Anyway, so Daredevil was part of that Marvel Knights line, and I started to absorb those comics and buy them and love them. So that was part of Quesada's rise to fame and power, I guess, if you will, at Marvel Comics, because he eventually became editor-in-chief of the Marvel Knights line. Because that line was so successful, he was promoted to the role of overall Marvel Comics editor-in-chief a couple of years later, and then about 10 years later became chief creative officer, and then 8 years later, in 2019, was promoted to executive vice president and creative director of Marvel Entertainment. So this guy has, over the last, I'll say just over 20 years, he went from being an artist to being pretty high up in the corporate chain at Marvel Entertainment. So that's pretty cool. But now he's leaving to pursue other things. So let's see some of the highlights that I gleaned from this story. Besides Marvel Knights, Quesada oversaw Civil War, which was, quote, one of the best-selling collected editions of any Marvel story, and of course the controversial Spider-Man One More Day. So he said via his Twitter account that he still plans to contribute work to the company and he wants to do some other things. I don't have a lot of his comic books that he has drawn. I have a couple Question quarterlies that I had bought, and I probably didn't even realize that, didn't really recognize who Joe Quesada is. Just at that time, another one of, another artist that whose art I wasn't familiar with. I later bought the Ray miniseries that he did and read that within the last, 2 years or so. And the 2001 Daredevil, which was written by Kevin Smith, which I read first in trade collection. So like I was talking about before, coming into the Marvel Knights stuff as they were being collected, that is. All right, well, good on him, and I'm looking forward to seeing or hearing about what he's doing next. Okay, and then the final thing that I wanted to spotlight for news is that it now being June marks the start of Pride Month, and to celebrate, DC Comics is offering a selection of LGBTQ-oriented comic books free to read on their DC Universe Infinite app. And these include Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles, which I've not read, the first 3 issues of the Crush and Lobo limited series. I'm not sure why it's the first 3. Maybe 4 hasn't come out yet. I thought that was done. Anyway, DC's 2021 Pride Anthology, which I believe I bought in print last year, Midnighter and Apollo #1, Far Sector #1, and Aquaman The Becoming #1. So I believe you just have to register with DC Comics to read those. I think all you have to do is provide an email address for those. You can also, if you want to become a subscriber, I know that you can also read DC's 2022 Pride Anthology, which I did recently. But of course, you can sign up for a limited time free account to access that as well. And then you can decide if you want to pay the $75 a year, as I do, to read all these DC comics. All right, I'm going to move on to the podcast spotlight that I mentioned, specifically the Fantastic Comic Fan podcast hosted by R.T. Fleming. The Fantastic Comic Fan podcast is something that is somewhat new to me, and I've enjoyed RT's episodes. And he graciously reached out to me, as I think I say in the following audio, to come onto his show. And so on episode 28 of that podcast, we talked about Donna Troy and New Teen Titans number 38 a little bit as well. So the next thing you'll hear is me talking with RT about his podcast. So I hope you enjoy this. Joining me is RT Fleming, the host of the Fantastic Comic Fan podcast. And I wanted to have RT on to talk about his show and introduce it to all of you. So welcome, RT. Thank you for joining us
this time. Thank you very much. The podcast actually started before a podcast as an Instagram and Twitter account. And then last year, about summer, I decided to flip it over into a podcast. But the problem with that is if you ever look onto iTunes or Spotify, there are literally dozens upon dozens of comic book podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So to try to make myself different, I decided I was going to go with the short form podcast. So every episode is about 20 minutes long, unless they have a guest, and even then it's only about 30 minutes long. And I try to get to the point and try to give a different take on things without being a talking head. Now, there's nothing wrong with talking head podcasts. There's great ones out there, but I know time is limited.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to waste comic book fans. I would rather put out like 3 or 4, which actually I'm doing this week, 3 or 4 15, 20-minute podcasts, then dump a whole hour on somebody because I don't see anybody really wanting to do that. The other niche that I focus on is I focus on digital editions. Those include things that are at your comic book shop, but also you might be able to get them on Hoopla or Comic Book Plus, which is a great public domain comic for Silver and Golden Age. I mean, you could just find tons of stuff there. And I think there's a misconception out there that you're either for digital or going to your comic book shop.
Right.
And I don't believe that. I believe they can actually complement each other and play off each other. They both have their places in the comic books. For example, finally, Marvel Unlimited, which is their unlimited plan, archived all 150 issues of Defenders. So that goes all the way like 10 plus years. Well, some fans might not want to collect all those. They might not want that for the collection. Here's a great way to look at some of these cool characters. Same thing over on DC server. The whole 161 issues of the original Justice League of America that goes on from the Silver Age to the end of the Bronze Age, the whole thing is there.
I didn't realize that. Last time I checked, not all the issues were out there. That's great.
Yes. And so being a Justice League fan, you can sit there and actually read and reread them without having to mess up your own physical copies and look for comic books that you can't afford. I mean, nobody can afford the first 25 issues of the Justice League.
So are you mostly a digital comics reader now, or do you still? Okay.
No, I went to digital because I don't like the clutter, and it's also for environmental reasons. I don't want to add to the clutter of the environment. So that's just my small little way. Yeah. But even something like Comixology Unlimited, they have tons of publishers represented there with all kinds of genres. They're always putting stuff on there, even though they trashed the app over this last couple months. They really did it. They never fixed it yet. But it really gives you the chance of going to somebody that's new to comic book and say, here, read this. You got to read this. Check this out. So it can actually act as a gateway to other writers, other genres. I was talking to somebody the other day who was a big ElfQuest fan. Well, you can get a lot of the ElfQuest stuff on Comixology Unlimited and read it. A lot of times Comixology might offer the first 15, 25 issues of a comic book free on their unlimited plan, then you can go buy some more if you want to. So there's a good give and take on that. So that's basically what the podcast is all about.
Wow. So okay, so you mentioned a few of the services
Yes.
that and maybe editorial on at least one of those apps.
Yes.
So are you a subscriber to like the Marvel Unlimited, the DC Universe, Comixology Unlimited?
Yes, all three of those I am subscribers to. I'm not happy with any of the three services. There's
Me either.
shortfalls with each of the service, and Marvel Unlimited was perfect last year, and they revamped the app in the fall of last year and totally made it a terrible app. And DC's actually got a great app, but their choices of what they add to the service is crazy because they have a lot of holes, and they put stuff that I want everything to be archived, yes, but at the same time, there's key comics books that should be out there, or they're in a digital format, like Secret Society of Supervillains. I just did a podcast with somebody on that. That's an old 70s Bronze Age thing. That's been a digital collection for 7 or 8 years, but they won't take the issues out, rip the issues out, and just put the individual issues onto the service. They won't do that with anything. Marvel's great about that. When Marvel puts out a Epic Works or a Masterworks, they'll take them copies and immediately put it right on the service.
Yeah, that's good.
DC doesn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that Discovery now, as the new owners, might be a better steward for the DC properties. So.
So if you had to choose, so you mentioned Comic Book Plus. I don't know if there was others that you had mentioned there. What's your favorite app to use when you're reading comics? If you had to choose.
Probably Marvel Unlimited, because they have the biggest collection of some of the titles. They have the complete 416 issues of Fantastic Four. They have all the Avengers from the very first Avengers. They have all the Strange Tales to Astonish from the very beginning, from like the very 1950s. So they have they honor their legacy. They just don't not put stuff out there for whatever reason. I mean, you can get all Strange Tales, like I said, everything that Silver Age is there. They're not very good with some of their Westerns, some of their romance comics, but all the big stuff, they're there for the most part. I mean, it just has a better collection of comic books, complete runs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of like the nowadays stuff that you're dealing with and or you're talking about. I'm really curious though, as I when I meet new people, start to know them a little bit. I'm always curious what how did you get started in comics? Because in your introduction to your show, you mentioned how you've been reading comics for over 40 years. Just like myself.
I actually changed that introduction recently. Did you? I just did with this late podcast. I'm like, I don't think I want people to know that I've been reading comics for 40 years. That makes me sound like an old, cranky old man. But no, I have been. Comic fans are kind of spoiled today because when I was a kid, I used to go to the drugstores or party stores. There used to be a rack of magazines, and down the bottom corner was this whole pile of comic books that you literally would thumb through to look through. So then they had the big spinner racks, which people think are so cool now. Well, sometimes that's all you had was a spinner rack. But a lot of my introduction was the old Whitman comic books. We used to have 3 in the pack, and I'd be peeling in the middle. That's how I got into a lot of Fantastic Four, some of the Superman stuff. But I started off mainly as a DC fan for the most part growing up.
Me too.
I think because distribution was also wonky back then. I mean, you didn't know if the comic book was going to be there next month or in 2 months or whatever.
Right.
But I think my area had a better concentration of DC comics than they had of Marvel comics. Because my first one was Action Comics. There are some wonky issues in there where he's fighting Amazo in a Superman jet creature or some kind of flying space object that he was in there. Flash, when Iris got killed, that was like my jumping on point.
Oh wow, me too.
And I was like, oh wow. Iris is like, wait a minute, you didn't really actually kill her. Oh no, we did. I wasn't into like the Batman stuff. I was a big Wonder Woman fan. I found that odd as I was growing up that I've always liked the Bronze Age Wonder Woman. But my favorite title would have to be Fantastic Four, which is kind of what the podcast is named after. That's where the
Oh,
Fantastic
okay.
comes from.
Yeah.
My gateway into Fantastic Four was probably right around 176, 177, leading up to issue 200. There's a couple of comic books, of Fantastic Four. I can remember buying them at the store, exactly which store I bought some of those things at.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the same way too. But I was mainly back then I was mainly into Fantastic Four, was the Marvel, and then a splattering of the DC. See, the DC, what got me with DC though was their dollar comics.
Mm-hmm.
You went from on the giant side, you went from these paltry little 17 page comic books to all of a sudden a 30 plus for the giant size to a 80 plus, no ads. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big hook. So I got into the Superman family, Legion of Superheroes back then. That got me hooked on Justice League was the giant. And I didn't realize it was Steve Englehart writing it at the time because I was 10 and who knew who Steve Englehart was.
Right. Yeah.
So that was my introduction to comic books, and I've been a fan ever since. And one of my favorite DC titles is again the Teen Titans, which most fans hate from the 70s, but I like it. If you actually read it, it was like 44 through about 52, 53, whatever. And it was a great comic book.
Yeah.
You really have to go read it. It's fun. It's Bronze Age.
Yeah.
Bronze Age are different.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, that's amazing. So you and I have very similar, I think a very similar story and very similar interests in the books that we used to read when we were younger. So that's really cool. So what are some of your favorite current comic books that you're reading these days?
I have a problem with a lot of the comic books nowadays is that they're sales driven and event driven. And a lot of the events and things that happen don't have any meaning or any weight in them.
Mm-hmm.
Like when Spidey was sick and Ben Reilly took over, that didn't flow into anything. The death of Doctor Strange, that really didn't flow too far. The good thing that came out of the death of Doctor Strange is that Clea became the Sorcerer Supreme, and that's a really good storyline. I believe who's writing is Dan Slott working on the current Fantastic Four?
Yes.
That is probably the best Fantastic Four run in many, many years because it's very true to the characters. You can actually connect the dots to the characters and say, oh, yeah, this makes sense. Ben and Alicia adopting a Skrull and a Kree as a kid. Oh, that makes sense because of all that history together. And it's not something that you're just throwing together. I mean, you can, that's a comic book that the characters are actually organically driven.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike John Kent, where a lot of his stuff seems to be shoved down your throat and accepted as this. And it has nothing to do with, his gay character or anything like that. It's just we never got the chance to really grow with John Kent. Never got a chance to really know the character.
Develop him into that, yeah.
I like the current Flash because I got mad because, wait a minute, what the heck? You thrown Barry Allen out of this and put back Wally into the Flash? What the? But it's actually some fun runs. I really enjoy that. The Thor run is actually very good because they're taking some old twists and redoing and reinventing without making it feel like they're retreading the stories. Unlike, I try to read Batman and Detective, but it's like every other arc, it's like Gotham under siege. And I'm like, really? Seriously? Come on, people. Unfortunately, I don't read that many independents, but I like what they did. I like what Chip Zdarsky did with Daredevil and Elektra. I thought that was pretty cool. That was a good run. I would love to see, and I'm going tangent line, I would love to see them do a real Defenders comic book with the original Defenders. I would love to see them take the Teen Titans, the original Teen Titans from George Perez and Marv Wolfman, and recreate them into a great storyline again. And bring back the Justice Society of America into a great storyline. Bring back the Legion into something, because I believe that every comic book with the right creative team can be the next big hit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think many of the things that you've talked about, things that I've read as well, it just proves that point. Marv Wolfman, going back to the new Teen Titans, Marv Wolfman had this idea of reviving the failed Teen Titans concept, and he brought George Perez over, or enticed George over to do it. and because George really wanted to do Justice League,
right?
So he
did for a while.
Yeah, he did. But it was he. I think he, if I'm remembering correctly, he thought that the New Teen Titans would be like the stepping stone to get to Justice League. And then what did they do? They created an epic comic book for our time, right? And anytime you talk to anybody who is a fan of the New Teen Titans, it's always the Wolfman and Perez run that they talk about. So.
Well, they did great characters. I mean, I understand, like over at Marvel, what can you do with characters that have been around for 60 years?
Mm-hmm.
How can you rejuvenate them? How can you make them good? Well, Fantastic Four is obviously doing a good job. Thor's done some good stuff to make it unique. Daredevil is a pretty good thing. Now, the Spider-Man one with Ben Reilly, that actually wasn't too bad. It's just there was no, what's the consequences?
Mm-hmm.
When Superman, the death of the Justice League, really seriously, who believes they're going to be dead for any time soon? Whereas when Superman died, he stayed dead for a better part of a year.
Mm.
And he actually was not in the comic books for a year. They actually canceled his books for a few months before they brought him back in. But it's not like I want more character-driven stories than event-driven storylines and sales, things that make me care, make me matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say that's why I read or why I enjoy reading a lot of the independent stuff that I read from Image and Vault, and I'm blanking on some of the publishers' names now, but I read quite a bit of that these days over Marvel and DC, because I get exactly what you're talking about from those books, and they're short runs. It's not like something that like Marvel and DC, they constantly have to keep those concepts, that IP going. Yes. Whereas those independent books, they don't have to worry about that as much, or maybe at all.
And the fans now don't realize that comic books are written for trade. Let's do the story in 6 issues, 5 issues, 7 issues, whatever. Back once upon, story arcs might go on for years. When Claremont wrote the X-Men, you had story plots that went on for years. Nothing was ever completely tied up. And we talked about Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan's run of the Fantastic Four that he wrote for 60 issues, 5 years, and he killed off Reed for a better part of 2 years.
Mm.
That was a run that wow, a lot of stuff happened in this run, and it didn't always end happily ever after. But you could see a story arc for 60 issues. I mean, there was just no clear bow where now, we got to end the story because we got to put it into a trade, and 6 issues up, got to do the next 6. So it's kind of missing that, that long-term plotting, instead of now it's just, we got to do it for the sales. We got to do it for the sales.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. All right. Well, Ron, thank you so much for coming on here talking about comic books and introducing my listeners to your show.
I'm not this curmudgeon-y, really. I'm actually one of the biggest cheerleaders of comic books. I just realized I sound like a cranky old man. No, I am the biggest fan of comic books. You will never hear me, unless I'm on this podcast, you will never hear me talk bad about a comic book. I'm the biggest cheerleader. I just feel that my job is to make you be excited about a new comic book or to rediscover an old comic book.
Yeah.
I don't want to be critical, but there's too many people that just want to trash comic books and storylines. And that's all I did on this podcast, was just completely trash comic books about what I don't like.
Well, I could attest to the listeners here. That's exactly what Ron does on his show. So he is very much a comic book fan. He wants to promote this stuff. And so I encourage everybody to go listen to the Fantastic Comic Fan podcast.
Can I make one more comment?
Yeah.
Yes, I would really like people to come and follow me. Not because I want to be some kind of big promoter of being a podcaster and sit on my pedestal, but I have been interviewing and promoting a lot of Kickstarter campaigns lately, a lot of indie publishers. And these are people that are just really putting their heart and souls into these comic books and these creations. And I want to see their Kickstarters get funded. I just did one called Punk Taco with Adam Alenta, and he's been in comic books for 20 years. He created this with his 5-year-old son together. And now his son is like 11. He's doing this Kickstarter campaign. But that's the type of stuff I like to try to promote, besides the Marvel and the DC, some of the independents I do. Yeah. But that's why I want people to listen to the podcast, so they can come in and say, oh, this is a good Kickstarter. Oh, this is a great comic book. Oh, look, this is a new publisher. I need to check him out. So thank you very much, though, for having me on today. I'd love to have the chance to come on again.
Are there any other things you'd like to highlight that are coming up on the show?
No, because I don't really know from day to day, week to week. I was complaining a couple of weeks ago that all I'm doing is reviewing comic books and I don't have any interviews on there. Now, this week, I've got like 3, possibly 4 interviews with Kickstarters and new comic books. And now I'm complaining and whining to myself, I don't have time to review any comic books because I've got all these guests on right now. So eventually I'll find the balance. I really have like missed reviewing some of the comic books. I have this huge backlog, so I have no idea what I'm doing from day to day, but
all right.
Well, always something different. So thank you again for having me on.
You betcha. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to contact you and whatnot?
You can reach me at fantasticcomicfan@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. I don't know the exact wordage for that, but my podcast is on every major platform, Spotify, Apple. Just type in Fantastic Comic Fan. You'll be able to find it. Please give it a listen, follow it, tell fans about it, spread the word, because I'm really trying to do this, not for me, but for the other creators and people out there, not just current ones, but spotlight on comic books that nobody talks about, creators that nobody talks about anymore. Mm-hmm. That type of stuff. That's what I want to do. So thank you again for having me on there.
You're very welcome. And like I said, everybody, go listen to the Fantastic Comic Fan podcast and let RT know how much you enjoy his show. And with that, thank you, RT. Talk to you later.
Okay.
And if you are interested in hearing more of the Fantastic Comic Fan podcast episodes, I will have a link in the show notes pointing you to that. So again, thanks to RT for inviting me to his show, and go listen, subscribe, and let RT know that you heard about his show from here. Okay, moving on to the last segment of the Spotlight episode. Some highlights from the previous catalogs, and I will start with DC as I usually do. And I mentioned Human Target before being up for an Eisner Award. Well, this is a new special, Tales of the Human Target by Greg Smallwood and Tom King, as well as Mikhail Hanin, Raphael Albuquerque, Kevin Maguire are adding their artistic talents to this. So as the solicitation text says, building on the most critically acclaimed series of the year, 4 of comics' top artists and Tom King tell the tales of what happened before Christopher Chance drank Lex Luthor's poison. Spoilers if you haven't read Human Target, issues 1 through 6 so far. Chance teams up with fan favorite members of the JLI in 4 connecting mysteries that lead them to that fateful day when one of them will kill the Human Target. So this is designed to fill a little bit of a gap between season 1 now, which is issues 1 through 6, and season 2, which is the back half of this limited series. So I'm getting this, and if you were a fan of the series so far, this is definitely a must buy. I'm curious how they're going to collect it. So they'll collect the first 6 issues and then the second 6, but where will that special be part of the next trade collection? I assume so, but all right. And then next up is something old that is new, or something new that is old. Anyway, the new champion of Shazam by artist Evan Doc Shaner and writer Josie Campbell. This I first mentioned back in November, I think, for a preview spotlight, and then it was put on hold for some reason. So now it's back to pre-order. So it's nice to see that it wasn't just canceled outright. I'm excited to read this for a couple of reasons. One is Doc Shaner doing the art, and then also just the focus on Mary Marvel as the new champion of Shazam. And I'll read the solicitation text in a second. But I basically Doc Shaner doing anything I want to read. But this seems like a perfect fit of artist or artistic vision and the character. So I'm really excited to read this, and I'm actually going to order the single issues instead of waiting for the trade, because I want to help support this. I don't remember exactly, but I seem to recall that there was some blowback about this series from a certain segment of the comic book community. I almost hesitate to call attention to it because they don't deserve the airspace. But there was some blowback about, well, it's unnecessary because we already have Shazam. Why do we need a new version of Shazam? And it's not going to last and blah, blah. It's comics. So what? This is telling a story featuring a character that doesn't normally get the spotlight like this. Or at least not the spotlight that I like, because they sure like to. I remember somewhere in the 2000s, I think it was the 2010s or so. Anyway, there was this period of time where at DC Comics especially, they like to turn their female superheroes dark. And they did this with Mary Marvel. They did this with Supergirl. I'm sure there's other characters you could point out. Anyway, I don't like that trend. I like my superheroes to be super heroic and not turn dark and not be so sexist in the way that they apply this. So anyway, I'm looking for this. This looks to be fun and interesting, and definitely from an artistic standpoint, I'm going to enjoy the hell out of this. So what's this about? Mary Bromfield has always struggled to determine who she is outside her family. Kind of hard to do when they're all superheroes. Now, after Billy Batson's heroic sacrifice, which I have no idea what that's referencing. The power of Shazam has vanished, and she's been left powerless. Most heroes would be distraught, but not Mary. It's finally time for a voyage of self-discovery as she prepares for her freshman year of college and civilian life. But nothing is ever truly normal for this young hero because she's just been chosen as the new champion of Shazam. At least according to a talking robot sent by her estranged brother Billy. Will she embrace the power? Or will it die along with this world's hope of survival against the mysterious magical forces awaiting to take control? It says, find out in Mary's first solo miniseries. All right, from Marvel, we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of The Amazing Spider-Man with Amazing Fantasy 1000. I wanted just to make note of that. It's interesting, too. Spider-Man was only 16 years old as a publication property when I first encountered him in comic book form in the late 70s. Of course, I had already watched Spider-Man on the Electric Company and the Amazing Spider-Man TV show, and so both of those things from the mid to late 70s. So, Spider-Man is always one of the very first 3 comics that I bought that I started on my comic book loving journey was an Amazing Spider-Man issue. So Spider-Man has a special place in my heart because of that. So that's why I wanted to make note of this. And also that Neil Gaiman is returning to the Marvel Universe with a story in this issue. So I'm looking forward to reading that. I plan to read this on Marvel Unlimited, however. The second and final thing from Marvel is the Fantastic Four Full Circle by Alex Ross. And this was kind of confusing because it was in the Marvel's previews catalog, but it's actually being put out by Abrams Comic Arts. So if you're looking for that, just understand it's not actually being published by Marvel. It's being published by Abrams. Anyway, Fantastic Four Full Circle is the first long-form work written and illustrated by acclaimed artist Alex Ross, who revisits a classic Stan Lee Jack Kirby story from the 60s and introduces the storyline for a new generation of readers. And now I'm very curious what story that is. With bold, vivid colors and his trademark visual storytelling, Ross takes Marvel's first team of superheroes to places only he can illustrate. Welcome to the Negative Zone and Marvel Arts, a new collaborative line of books between Marvel Comics and Abrams Comic Arts. So I'm getting this because it is Alex Ross. For those Fantastic Four fans out there, there's a clue here, the Negative Zone. So that probably clues you in to what story this is, but I don't know because I've not read a whole lot of Fantastic Four, and definitely not early Fantastic Four. So anyway, I'm looking forward to reading this. So from Image Comics is something I'm very much looking forward to as well. It is the Aerosmith Volume 2 Behind Enemy Lines collection by Carlos Pacheco and Kurt Busiek. I talked about Aerosmith Volume 1, that first 6-issue miniseries with Damien on the Sleepy Reader 666 YouTube channel, as well as the audio version on the Never Stay Dead podcast. So in that episode, Damien and I mentioned the second volume, which I think only had 1 or 2 issues out at that time. And he was getting in single issues and I was waiting for the trade. Well, now I'm going to get the trade so I can read this and be immersed in that Arrowsmith universe once again. I'm very much looking forward to seeing Carlos Pacheco return to this and really see, has his art style changed? Is he still doing those wonderful visual things that Damien and I talked about in that first volume? So anyway, if you're not familiar with what this second volume is about, here we go. In a world, I thought we stopped using that phrase a long time ago. In a world where World War I is fought with magic and dragons as much as bullets and trenches, young Fletcher Arrowsmith of the Overseas Arrow Corps is sent on a secret mission into enemy territory to find a mysterious ally and stop a deadly plan that could destroy all of Europe. Along the way, he'll deal with dangerous enemy sorcerers, werewolves, and trolls, and learn the true secrets behind magic and the war itself. So, like I said, I'm really looking forward to that. Something I am, also from Image, something I am reading currently digitally through the Elsa Chartier and Tom King Substack. What is that called? Everlasting Productions or something Everlasting. Anyway, it is Love Everlasting. So they are now printing those. So I've read 4. I think they've released 4 so far digitally through their Substack for free. So you can subscribe to their Substack and go read those 4 issues right now. But they are now going to be printing these issues through Image. So I just wanted to make note of that in case you've missed this. And it is a wonderful visual delight. They are playing with romance comics and sci-fi concepts or like the sci-fi concept of like what is that? Oh shoot, what is that movie? Groundhog Day, where you keep reliving, or other concepts like that. Anyway, this is what the solicitation says about it. So this series set in a world as frighteningly fantastical as any found beyond the stars. Romance comics. Joan Peterson discovers that she is trapped in an endless cycle, a problem to be solved, a man to marry, and every time she falls in love, she disappears into another teary saga. Her bloody journey to freedom starts in this breathtaking, groundbreaking first issue, which I've already read 4 of. So anyway, I'm just very pleased that this is now seeing print, and then the larger public can see it as well. Finally, from Image, I mentioned earlier that there were 2 things that are in this episode that I've already talked about. This is the second one. So while Everyone is Tulip is getting an Eisner nomination, The Deadliest Bouquet, which I featured in the April Spotlight episode, is also, so this is issue number 1 coming to print. So it was a successful Kickstarter and has been around for about a year, I think. I want to say, I don't know, I don't remember now. But anyway, so now you can read the start of this series, this mini series, from Gab Contreras, Carola Borelli, and Erica Schultz. So it says here, Jasmine Hawthorne was a hard-edged Nazi hunter who trained her children well in the art of espionage. But in 1998, when her complicated past finally catches up with her, it's up to her 3 estranged daughters, Rose, Poppy, and Violet, to solve their mom's murder, if they can avoid killing each other in the process. So what I have seen of this book, what I've read of it, it seems quite delightful. And so I'm pleased to see that this is, again, like Love Everlasting, we'll be seeing, or our larger audience will be exposed to it. So from Ablaze is Red Lightning. It's a hardcover. This is by Ricardo Azzeni and Marco Bucci. It is the morning of January 10th, 2016, and 30-year-old Samuel is ready to leave the house and live another day of his ordinary existence. As soon as he arrives on the street, he learns about David Bowie's death. The news strikes him so hard that he is stunned, and his are not moments of bewilderment, but hours, days, years, and centuries. He finds himself catapulted across space and time. He awakens hundreds of thousands of years later in a society of the future, in the year 200,016, not so different from his own, although he is surrounded by people dressed as dinosaurs, integrated biological technologies, and there is a global well-being. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Is it perhaps the utopia of the future? Samuel will have to try and find out and find his own dimension in the process without losing himself. Red Lightning is a touching tribute to David Bowie. Long live the White Duke. Just the idea of someone being so profoundly impacted by the death of an artist, such as David Bowie, that they become hurled through, or as I said, catapulted across space and time. So it kind of reminds me of a mashup of the movies Yesterday and Blinded by the Light, and the idea of being unstuck in time from Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. So just all those mashup ideas, at least as they are coming to me, just makes this a potentially interesting read. From Abstract Studios, which is Terry Moore, is a new series called Parker Girls. So if you're familiar with the Parker Girls from Strangers in Paradise, and I think they were part of or mentioned in the SIP 25th Anniversary series as well. But anyway, he has a new miniseries out, so I always want to promote Terry Moore's work. So in case you're not familiar with this concept, when Annie Graham's lifeless body washes up on Venice Beach, the nation mourns the loss of a popular actress. Police suspect her death was no accident, but Graham's husband, billionaire Zachary Lott, has the best lawyers money can buy, and the investigation stalls. That's when Tammy Baker, from Strangers in Paradise, decides to take matters into her own hands and enlists 3 of her finest Parker Girl operatives to bring the Lott empire down, one shocking scandal at a time. So I presume that this will feature Kachu, but who knows? Maybe he'll decide to focus on different Parker Girls in this series. But regardless, this is a must-read for me, for sure. All right, moving on to Dark Horse. Just a couple things here. 40 Seconds, which is a trade collection collecting issues 1 through 5 of the Comixology original series by Christopher Mitten and Jeremy Hahn. Let's see. It's a science fiction fantasy adventure about a brave team of science explorers traveling through a series of alien gateways to answer a distress call a galaxy away. They find themselves jumping across the universe through strange and beautiful landscapes, only to be hunted by a vast, inexplicably unstoppable and dangerous horde. Amazing truths lie at the final gate, if only they can make it in time. So I'm always on a lookout for a good science fiction adventure, and this seems to be something like that. I'm a little hesitant only because the description here is so vague. I don't know, what this is. And so when I looked this book up in previews, there's not much there to go on. The couple preview pages that they show, the colors look nice, the art looks nice, but this is a gamble. But I am interested in this one. Something I will be buying, however, coming from Dark Horse is, and I mentioned this in the March news spotlight, is Confabulation, an anecdotal autobiography by Dave Gibbons. And in case you've forgotten, it is a comprehensive, in-depth, and personal journey through the eyes of one of the world's most famous comics creators, presented as alphabetically chaptered memoirs, and that's one of the things that drew me to this, was that particular phrase. These extensive anecdotes cover a legendary life in comics, from working on Doctor Who and meeting Tom Baker to being inducted into the Eisner Hall of Fame. Gibbons also discusses, for the first time anywhere, the reasons why he and fellow Watchmen co-creator Alan Moore no longer speak. Packed with over 300 iconic, rarely seen and unpublished art pieces, which might be worth the admission alone, and photographs, Confabulation not only entertains but peels back the layers of a fascinating career in comics. So yeah, I'm ordering this. I want to read this. Moving on to Scout is a book that I have been waiting for, a collection of Impossible Jones, Volume 1, Grin and Gritty, by David Hahn and Carl Kessel. Full Throttle Thrills by Hahn and Kessel. A thief pretending to be a superhero? It's not impossible. It's Impossible Jones. Read the explosive origin of the impulsive Impossible Jones as she tries to convince citizens, cops, and fellow superheroes that she's New Hope City's newest and coolest superpowered protector. But she's also a damn good thief, and with her new powers, pilfering and purloining have never been easier. Added bonus, cops don't shoot at her, are glad to tell her exactly what they're up to, and everyone's happy to show her their security systems. But it's a high-stakes, high-wire balancing act. And even shape-shifting superpowers can be stretched thin. And this collects the first 4 issues of this, or the 4-issue miniseries. I'm not even sure what it is. Is it a mini? Is it an ongoing? I don't know. But all I know is I want to read this. And finally, I can. And then finally, the very final thing I have for you today in the Spotlight episode is from Vault, Blue Flame, the complete series by Adam Gorham and Christopher Cantwell. The Blue Flame is a cosmic hero. The Blue Flame is a DIY vigilante that fights crime. I think I should say who fights crime on the streets of Milwaukee. The Blue Flame is a blue-collar HVAC repairman named Sam Brossom. In the wake of a horrific tragedy, the boundaries of the Blue Flame's identity blur even further. Now, before a universal trial, the Blue Flame must prove that humanity is worth saving. But in order to do that, Sam Brossom has to save himself. Can he? That seems like that's kind of a weird thing. Can he? Well, anyway, this is one of those things where, you hear people talking about it in other podcasts. It's written by Christopher Cantwell, and given my appreciation of his work and other things, I wanted to read this. And so I've been patiently waiting for this series to be collected. And I don't know how many issues. It says complete series, and it doesn't say how many issues that is. So regardless, I want to read this. Not only is it a new superhero universe, but the idea of there seems to be some different dimensions to the character, and also he has to prove that humanity is worth saving. So wow, that's a lot to put on the shoulders of an HVAC repair, a blue collar HVAC repairman, let alone anybody else for that matter. But anyway, I'm looking forward to reading that, and I hope that you perhaps found some things or heard first about some things here in this preview spotlight, not to mention all the other things as well. So thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. If you'd like to leave feedback or send me feedback, you can do so by emailing me at longboxreview@gmail.com. Voice messages and text messages are welcome by calling or texting 208-953-1841. And you can also chat with me at Longbox Review on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook as well. And with that, I leave you. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.